Good afternoon. We know that representation matters on politics, matters on panels, matters on executive boards. But why does it matter to have an accurate representation of society on our screens, on TV and TV series and films? That's the question we'll be discussing today with high-level policy and filmmakers from across Europe. My name is Dan Sobowitz. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar brought to you by ViacomCBS and EU40. And I have the pleasure of moderating four very distinguished speakers that I'd like to introduce to you. I'd like to say hello to Evin Ensir. You're a member of the European Parliament from Sweden. You're co-president of the Anti-Racism and Diversity Intergroup, and you're also on the LGBTI Intergroup. Thank you for joining us, Member of Parliament. We also have with us Michaela Mua, European Commission Anti-Racism Coordinator. I hope I did a better job in pronouncing your name this time, Michaela. Suzanne Schildknecht, SVP MTV Entertainment Group from ViacomCBS. Hello, Suzanne. Good to see you again. And finally, Natalie Kudiavo, your senior TV and film producer from UEFA in Germany. And before we hear from you four ladies, I'd like to get a sense of what people around the world feel about this topic. And we have a short video that represents the results of a special survey that was conducted by ViacomCBS Global Insight team, asking people about how they feel about representation on their screens from around the world. Let's watch it.
The world is full of diverse groups of people.
My name is Massa Wandile Tom, or Massa Diamond, a gender non-binary person.
Ik ben een trotse, donkere persoon.
My name is Carrie.
My name is Lorena.
I'm Darcel.
Hoi, ik ben Joris.
I am a descendant of Muscradis family, but I'm also son to my mother, friends to my friends.
So how do people around the world feel about on-screen representation? We carried out a groundbreaking study through an international survey and video interviews to immerse ourselves in the lives of consumers around the world.
There's so many different intersections to my being.
You need people to inspire you to grow up as a person.
Representation matters because it has a real impact on people's lives. What we see reflected on screen influences how we see the world. Audiences everywhere are calling for more to be done to improve representation and diversity, both on and off screen. The time for positive change is now.
Seperti begini, pada masa akan datang, saya suka melihat lebih representasi yang betul, lebih representasi sebagai seorang Muslim yang betul.
Eu sou otimista nessa questão. Eu espero que eu esteja certo, trazendo. A gente tem o potencial de trazer muita mudança.
So we'd like to make this discussion as interactive with the webinar audience as possible. And I invite you to use the Q&A button that you see on the bottom of your screens, not only to send us your questions, we're interested in those as well, but also if you have suggestions or ideas that you think you can make entertainment more inclusive, pitch your ideas to our four panelists, and we'll try to bring them to their attention and to the attention of the other viewers. We'll also try to use some of the latest features from Zoom. We'll see how we get by with that, using some poll questions and get your inputs on some of the topics we will be discussing. So I invite our technician Bruce to put the first question on the screen. We just saw in the video opinions from around the world, but I'd like to ask you about the case of those of us in Europe. I think most of the viewers connected in the four speakers are in Europe. To which extent you feel that we are being authentically represented on the screens in our entire diversity of European population. So feel free to vote between 0 being the lowest and 10 being the highest level of representation. Maybe we can give it 3 more seconds and see what we get. I would say the audience is relatively optimistic. Well, nice. I would say wide distribution. There's a bit of everything, but yeah, a lot of work. I would say even the optimistic ones. I would say there's still work to be done. And with that, I'd like to turn to you, MEP Ensir. The famous motto of the EU is "United in Diversity." So there are entire debates about how diverse the EU institutions are themselves, and I'm sure that as long as they are not diverse enough, doesn't make the work of the EU in working on diversity any easier. But specifically when it comes to the realm of entertainment here, do you see a role for the EU to regulate and make it more diverse? Is it the role in a democracy for the regulator to come and say to the creative industries, you need to be more diverse, more inclusive, and we are the regulators are going to push you in that direction?
Thank you very much for this invitation to this very interesting discussion. And I would very much say that, of course, representation is a matter of democracy. It is a matter of human rights. When a big part of our population is not represented, of course, there is a lack of democracy in our society, on a European level, on a national level, on local level, on levels of the society. So representation matters, and as said, makes a real impact. But more than that, representation is a matter of power, and it is a matter of sharing that power equally among all our inhabitants in all our people in all our union. And we need to ensure to both battle or combat visible obstacles as well as non-visible. Visible as in the forms of discrimination that in the end all of this is coming from, and the invisible part as in not being represented on screen or off screen, also for that sake, because offline and online, on screen and off screen goes very much hand in hand, and developments are also going very much hand in hand. So if there is discrimination offline, there is also discrimination online, and vice versa. So we need to battle them both, and the European Union, I would say, have a very important role on ensuring that all our citizens are included. Not at least, we have a lot of different strategies in place. We have the anti-racism action plan. We have the LGBTQI strategy, the first ever on the European Union. We also have the gender equality strategy and the gender action plan for the foreign actions of the EU, but they also need to be translated into real policies, which I see a huge lack of today. And I could also go into very concrete legislation that I actually would want to see that the European Union would highlight, and that we should put on the table more of and address more of. One of the most important, I would say, is the horizontal anti-discrimination directive, which unfortunately is right now blocked since many years back in the European Council. At the same time, as I'm happy that we will now have the Commission after us pushing for more of concrete legislation on EU level, we will see an extension of the list of EU crimes, which would then include hate crimes, but that would of course be also up to the Parliament and the Council in the end to negotiate on, and I'm fearing that the Council will here also constitute an obstacles. So yeah, representation matters, and the EU has a lot to do.
So MEP Nsir, I hear you're very enthusiastic about the topic of representation and inclusion, but I'd like to insist on the topic of entertainment, because I see that you're working horizontally in many different sectors, and maybe we can also turn that question not only to you, I'm putting you on the spot, but also to our viewers. We have this exact question for them as well, if we can put it on their screens, to which extent they see the EU well placed to intervene on making entertainment more inclusive. So we can give it another moment for people to answer and see what they think, but where do you stand on that? Is it the role of the legislator, or is it, I mean, I know that you're raising awareness, when people are more aware of it, maybe it will happen by itself. We can speak about carrots and sticks, but would any legislator, and the EU in particular, have a role in pushing the industry further than its comfort zone, in becoming more inclusive behind and in front of the camera? And as you answer, maybe we can switch to the results of this poll.
Absolutely. I think that we need to do both of them. On one hand, we need to use the legislation as a stick, and on the other hand, we also need to show support through not at least financial support, but also other kinds of support to the industry to ensure that they take their share of responsibility, because the whole society needs to take their share of responsibility in order for all our people to be represented and to not face obstacle to be able to fulfill their dreams. So I would say that yes, very much we need to be able to regulate. Not all the legislator would agree with me, unfortunately, I would say. But I really see that politics and as a legislative, we have a huge responsibility to ensure that all our population is included. So just to say that the private sector should take their own responsibility, I think it's easy to make it, or it's making it easy for ourselves. Even though I hope that the whole society, including the private sector, is taking the share responsibility. We see that it is not happening today. So in that sense, we need to use carrot and stick at the same time.
So we will hear from some private companies in the industry in a moment, and there are some enthusiastic voices there as well. But moving from one EU institution to the other, from the European Parliament to the European Commission, I'd like to turn to you, Michaela. Today's hard day of pronunciation, going from Sweden to Finland, still in the Nordics. So you have an interesting biography because you were a professional athlete, and 6 months ago, correct me if I'm wrong, you were the first coordinator of anti-racism by the European Commission. So that the role was created recently and you're the first to take it. But I'm mentioning your biography as an athlete because you come from the world of culture and sports. And that's where I'm interested, as you being the first coordinator, do you see engagement with the creative industry, film, entertainment as part of your role? Is something that you should be doing as the coordinator of anti-racism? And if so, how do you envision, maybe you can tell us about the last 6 months, but I don't know, over the course of your mandate, how do you envision working with this industry and why? I mean, maybe you can tell us where you see entertainment coming into your role of changing prejudice and public opinion in Europe. That was a very long question. Maybe you can find your way in.
Yes, and thank you also on my part for having me here today. I'm really excited, and thank you for facilitating this space for an all-female panel for us to also share our thoughts in relation to today's topic. So indeed, I have this background as a former professional athlete. And coming from that world, I think the power of representation, of kind of what can be done in representation and in regards to equality, advancing equality, is not necessarily seen as something that the entertainment industry and cultural industry can have a massive impact on, but it needs to be done very consciously. And that's why I really appreciated this extensive survey and study and reporting that was done by ViacomCBS, because it really is the first step, is to look internally, to want to make that change, to recognize that, we can do better. And what we need first is data. We need to recognize that we are, after all, making, for instance, when we're talking about media, we're making media for the viewers, for the audience. So how can we ensure that everybody watching feels like they feel seen, they see themselves? What was very interesting to me in the results of the study was indeed that. Which is maybe a lesser known fact, or a lesser discussed fact, is how, well, basically, the premise of you cannot be what you cannot see, right? So I think the responsibility there is that we're really shaping the world through media. We really are shaping the world to what an expert looks like, right? I have been in situations myself where I come into meetings, for instance, as an expert, and I am looked at kind of like, excuse me, ma'am, what are you doing here? And first of all, I'm like, please don't call me ma'am. And second of all, I'm like, I am the expert. But what does this link to? This links to the idea of, for instance, who can be a commission, civil servant. What does that look like? What do we think about when we hear commission a coordinator, commission employee? We don't necessarily think of a European Black woman. And where does this come from? So it's really a long line of it's not just the fact of diversity. It's not just the fact that we have, the whole all the colors of rainbow in the room, but it's actually shaping the world. It really is shaping the world onto all the possibilities and all the diversity of. So I do think here there's an immense possibility. And I think as the first EU anti-racism coordinator, my mandate includes, of course, trying to ensure the successful implementation of the EU anti-racism action plan. This gives me quite, because there's no benchmark, this gives me a little bit of a, we're figuring it out here, of course, in the framework of the action plan. So for me personally, I would like to work with every and anybody who wants to work on our common cause of anti-racism. So I think also, the entertainment industry really would also be a relevant piece of the puzzle. As a former athlete again, and especially as a team player, I don't think there are enough players on this team. So I think all, willing and dedicated players, we need to work together on these issues. And I think I would really like to kind of mirror what the MEP Insir said about that we indeed, it's not just the responsibility of one or two actors, it's the responsibility of all of us, the institutions, the private sector, entertainment industry, etc. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you perfectly answered my question. There was also an invitation here from people from the industry to reach out to you. So if there are any viewers, participants here from the industry, you just heard the word. Michaela is happy to work with you if you're also as passionate about taking your responsibility on making your productions more inclusive. But there was also something interesting that, any interesting things that you said, but one thing I picked on, which is the mere representation. We don't exist if we're not there. But we actually prepared a poll question about not only representation, but also accurate representation. It also came up in the survey about many people feeling like they are represented, but not in an accurate way. And I'm going to turn to the audience to ask them how they feel about the stereotypes on screen, because I suspect that sometimes representation is even worse than non-representation if it's done in the wrong way. If you stereotype a group, a minority, and present them in a way that is negative per se, or that they are not comfortable with it, it's not the way they see themselves, it's even worse than not representing them at all. So here we're asking the audience if they feel like the current entertainment that they're consuming is actually breaking stereotypes or encourages them. I think it might be interesting for you to see the results. Of course, the polls we're doing now are by no means representative, and the methodology is not as robust as the survey that we presented in the beginning. This is more for us just to have a discussion among the participants of this webinar. Okay, so we have a nice distribution. Again, I would assume that it really depends what it is that we're watching, and I guess some companies are doing a better job in being representative than others. But I guess it shows again the fact that we all agree that what we're watching is creating realities. Fiction is not only fiction. Fiction can create a new reality. And I see Natalie nodding there. We're going to turn from the policymakers to the industry. And before I turn to Suzanne, we do have another poll question. This time it's an open-ended one. You can put in whatever you want in there. And we'd like to ask you which identities you think are still missing, because in the survey that we saw in the beginning, for me, what was interesting was the fact that there was ethnicity and gender, but also socioeconomic class came as a missing identity. So some people felt they were not being represented because their social class wasn't there. But here we're wondering if there are any other identities that are somehow missed out, that we think, even where we're, with all the good intentions, we're trying to be as inclusive as possible, but maybe someone out there still doesn't feel like their identity is being well portrayed on the screen. I don't know if we can see any results. I guess we can also put it on the screen later on if and when it comes in. Like I said, we're experimenting with some new features here. So I don't know if everything is going to work for us. Do we get something? Okay, they're answering now. I see the technician is writing me. Okay, so maybe Bruce, the technician, you can put it on when you're ready. And with that, I will turn to Suzanne. So hi, Suzanne, good to see you again. Last time we spoke, you were in quarantine. So I see you in the office. That's usually good news when someone is back in the office. I hope everything is okay with you. I'd like to ask you, so you are from the company CBS Viacom that initiated this webinar together with EU40. You're also the company that commissioned the survey. So obviously, there's something about your company that really cares about this topic of diversity and inclusion. And you told me that it comes all the way from your very top management. But I'd like to ask you to put it a little bit in context. So what it is that you were trying to do with this survey, and what other initiatives do you have in mind about diversity and inclusion? Maybe put it within everything that your company does. I'll just mention before I turn to you, for those who don't know ViacomCBS, that you are quite massive. You are a giant group. You operate in over 170 networks, and you reach approximately 700 million subscribers in approximately 180 countries. I'm reading now. So yeah, whatever this policy decision you make has quite a significant impact on quite a few of us. So with that in mind, I'm very curious to hear what it is that you have in mind on inclusion at ViacomCBS.
Again, a very long question. Thanks, Dan. Lovely to be part of this. Thank you very much. And I am out of quarantine. However, I am at home. It would be lovely to have a bed with cushions in the office. I'll make a note, actually. Before I actually start, I wanted to, because we talked about the survey and we showed it in the beginning a little bit. One of the most intriguing outcomes for me was that the inclusion and diversity topic is actually not a minority, it's a majority topic. If you look at the survey, it's so many people do not feel included. It's a mainstream topic. And I thought that was very interesting in itself. But maybe we can get to that a bit later. So yeah, how do I perceive the role at ViacomCBS when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? I mean, you just said it, we are a very big media company. We operate in 180 markets across the world, and we create and distribute content. And we create that content for 700 million very diverse people across all these very diverse countries. And ViacomCBS is really committed to make change in content. And that means not only produce content, but have content on screen, behind the cameras, et cetera, et cetera. So we very much believe that to be best in class in content creation and in storytelling, we must reflect the audience. We must reflect the diversity of the audience. And this is also why we did that survey, because we wanted to check how far are we? And what the survey definitely proves is that it is so important. The reflection is so super important on screen. So we make diversity and equity and inclusion a really big part and embedded in all areas of our business. It's mainly content, of course, but it's all in other areas in the business as well. But let me give you a couple of examples, actually, when it comes to content. For example, last year, we actually launched a new initiative, a policy. It's called No Diversity, No Commission Policy. And it promotes diversity both on screen and behind scenes. And the policy actually requires all production companies to follow diverse guidelines, and before we check the budgets, and actually also before we start the production, of course, so we can make sure that this actually reflects on screen, but also in the teams, in the creators, in the talents, and so on. So we rolled that out across all 180 countries. And the big challenge was, of course, what does diversity mean in each country? It's so different. We discussed this at very length. And the big question in the end, we asked everybody to ask themselves is, who's actually missing at your table, in your country, in your region? And that kind of made click And it's an easy question to answer then. Well, before it really seemed like a very big question, very difficult question. So that was one example which actually came out of a task group led by employees in our company. So we will now, next step now is to actually move forward to other agencies, to marketing, to partnering, et cetera, et cetera. Another example of content for change I wanted to share with you, because it's quite recent as well, are the MTV European Music Awards. Last year, we planned to have them in Budapest, in Hungary. And in July last year, the Hungarian government actually passed anti-LGBTQ plus legislation restricting media content. So this was like, oh, wow, you know, MTV in Hungary now. So after a lot of discussions, we decided, well, this show must go on and it must be big, sending out a really powerful message of support for the LGBTQ community in Hungary, across the world. And I tell this story because the power of media entertainment in that case is massive. We just have a really loud voice if we want to. So PR, marketing, everything on stage, the whole narrative focused on MTV's values and solidarity with the LGBTQ community. And we just celebrated EMAs globally for all and everyone. And this, of course, traveled across the world with a really tremendous echo, reaching 4 billion people. So this had really a big impact on educating, on driving awareness, and on definitely driving content for change. So it was also bold, and I think boldness is something which we need if we really mean it. We really need to make statements. But so those were two examples for content for change. Besides content, one of the main roles in order to be able to do that, and you mentioned at the beginning, Dan, is actually leadership. Leadership plays a massively big role when you really mean D&E&I to take place. And at Viacom, this is a shared journey. It starts at the top. It starts with our CEO, leadership team, board of directors, and with transparency and with accountability as key requirements is really on top of their agendas. And that's important for everyone in the company because it trickles down, but also HR. We have a very dedicated HR who really embeds D&E&I in every aspect of the employee experience, whether it's recruitment, development, retain talent, measure. We actually introduced a dashboard where we measure diversity. Again, that was discussed tremendously because it sounds a bit weird, but if you really want to change something, that's exactly what you need. You need to put KPIs to your plan. So that's what we did. Again, this came out, by the way, of a task force led by employees. So leadership needs to empower employees to be part of it, to be part of the culture. And that's the third aspect, I think, that this is all formed into a culture. And if you empower employees to be part of this, to work with this, then it can really be something. So you have to make offers. We do inclusion weeks. We build task forces led by employees, as I said, across the board, across the globe. And then it really feels like it's meant, and media companies, big as we are, we just have such a loud voice and we want to use it. And it's a big responsibility. So everything Michaela just said, I can totally agree. And I would love to actually sit around the table with her and see how can we put, how can we combine that power and those great ideas. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
no, you totally have. I want to relate to so many of the things that you said. First, there's the concrete synergies coming out of this webinar already of bringing you and Michaela together, which is an excellent result by itself. But while listening to your example on Hungary, it made me realize that when I was talking earlier with MEP Insia, I was pushing her with the assumption that the policymaker is always more sensitive to inclusion than the private sector, than the entertainment industry. And your example on Hungary was showing us exactly the opposite, how the private sector can actually push the policymakers when they're not doing their job, when they're actually going against the direction of diversity, to say we are not ready to any censorship or to restricting diversity or freedom of speech. So I guess the question about Europe can go in different directions. It's also about its own member states, and when one country is not playing according to European values of diversity. But you also mentioned a very interesting example on how in different countries what it means to be a minority is different. And I suppose that by definition, a minority is more difficult to always trace in here because quantitatively there are less. So to find out who is the minority that we're not catching. And I'm wondering if now we can get some interesting input from the survey that we put out earlier. If Bruce can show us the screen: disabilities, Roma community, gay community, gender not conforming. What else do we have there? Professional Black men, interesting. Again, Romani, non-binary people, handicap, sexual orientation. Do you see here anything that has not come up from top of your head in the different countries and communities? Or I was very curious what we were going to get here. I have to say that the two that draw my attention are the professional Black men. It goes a little bit in line with what Michaela was saying earlier, breaking those stereotypes that a woman of color comes into the room. We don't expect that
absolutely
she's there to clean the floor. We understand that she might as well be managing the discussion. But
I would like to get that list, actually. I can't scroll through it so quickly, but I would love to get that list to cross-check, basically. But if I can just say one more thing, because again, this is what you just did on the poll, and again, what Michaela said, we did also a campaign in Germany, for instance, where we talked with actors and actresses, and they told us, POC actors and actresses, and they told us how they get roles. And usually POC actors and actresses, they're offered roles, either they're criminals or drug dealers or homeless people. So we gave them, it's incredible. And, the cool detective guys are usually still the male white guys. It's changing slowly, but anyways. And we made a big campaign, big on social media, and we gave those actors and actresses a big voice, and it was all across Germany. And they just told about their stereotyped experiences. And it was super powerful to see what they have to say, because I'm sure a lot of people never thought about this. So it's all about educating people, but in an engaging way, of course.
And so Germany is a perfect segue to Natalie. So great to see you again, my dear. And you told me something shocking when I had the prep call with you. You were saying to me that as far as you know, you're the only woman of color who's producing films and TV series in Germany. A huge country of 80 million with a significant non-white population. It's the biggest country in Europe, and you're the only one. So I'd like to turn to you, asking you about your experience in that industry. And also, I understand that your company, UEFA, has a very interesting approach also to making sure that your productions are not only inclusive, but also inclusive in a way that respects the whatever identity or minority that you bring to the screen. So if you can share with us your experience.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, it was when I told you, it was for me also, it was really, it was a strike somehow when this was obvious for me, because there was like a film student who approached me, and she said, she was like 26 or something. She said, "Oh, would you like to be my mentor?" And I said, "Oh, I'm honored. But what can I give to you? What can I teach you? Why me?" And she said, I'm a Black female producer. I'm at film school. And for me, you're the only visible, really working on a certain level fiction producer in Germany. And I was like, oh my God, I wasn't aware of that. So this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And it was really shocking, I have to say. So I, for myself, thought, oh my God, we have to do something about this and talk to also the students, be visible. And it's sometimes when I go to panels, it's so nice when people afterwards come up to you and say, it's just good to see you, that you're in the business, that you are there, and that there's a place for us in the industry. And so representation matters, of course. And talking about UFA, the company I'm working for, we are one of the biggest TV production companies in Germany. And we have to say that really, like in 2020 was a game changer year for us, maybe for all of us. Of course, the pandemic, but also George Floyd. And we were talking about this incident a lot, which was really, changing our minds, because, we think we have a big responsibility with what we are programming, what we are producing, because images are so powerful. This is what Michaela said, I think Avin said. And I think really we have a big responsibility as producers to what we show. And so we have a great CEO, Nico Hofmann, who is part of a minority. He's part of the gay community. So we were always looking at LGBTQI+. And since I came to the company, we were looking at POC. We were talking about gender, but also people with disabilities. And we made a self-commitment to more diversity in our programs among the crew and the team. So this means in front of the camera and behind the camera. And our goal is to reflect the diversity of our society, of the German society, in the overall annual portfolio of UFA programs by the end of 2024. So 2 more years. And for this purpose, we use the current census of the federal government as a guideline. So we kind of invented also a tool. We are really, working on that now to evaluate our programs and see how we are progressing. And but like in my daily work, we have 4 diversity cycles. As I said before, gender, POC, people with disabilities, and LGBTQI+. So there's always a mentor ahead of this circle. So if you happen to have a problem or to have a question, so you can always go there and ask, and you can have sensitivity reading, you can have an exchange, you can get more like insight into the culture or the community, which is great. For example, I produced last year the first gay series in Germany, which is also unbelievable if you ask me. We're talking 2021. So I was talking to my colleagues from LGBTQI+, POC, and we were just like talking to each other. Are we missing anything? Because I think everybody has unconscious bias. And so maybe sometimes there's not a red flag. And it's so good to have people you can talk to and just be open-minded about it. And for example, when I was producing the show, this show about 4 gay men in Berlin, of course, I felt like, a guest, because it's not my community, but it was so interesting. So I was just like, I could give my experience as a producer into that, but we were so open-minded. So like in front of the camera and behind the camera, we had so many people out of the community. It was really a great experience. And also about, to be accurate about, how to show the people out of the community, and thought this was really important. Also, the writer and the director, he's gay. So, otherwise I wouldn't have done the show, to be honest. I think, at the moment, really, I wouldn't touch anything, which is like, if you have the feeling the person who's writing the story, the narrative is not coming out of the community. Maybe in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, this can be different. At the moment, no. Because we had a big, I think, problem with this kind of stereotype storytelling for the past decades, especially in Germany, I have to say, because if you watch television, I think maybe Michaela can say the same thing. When you grew up, you didn't see anybody like you on television. And like Suzanne said, a Black woman would be a prostitute or, a homeless person or a refugee. And so you didn't have any just like role models. So I think, we have really big responsibility, but it's also a big chance, I have to say, because, I'm not an activist, but, I would love to change things. And in my, work, I can do a lot because, I think images are very strong.
I guess we're all activists one way or another. But what I find very interesting is that even those of us who consider ourselves to be very sensitive to this topic of inclusion, and I think on this panel, myself included, we all participate, are part of one minority group. But you were just saying, even when you're so sensitive to this topic of inclusion and diversity, you can still get it wrong. And you were saying yourself, if you're not part of the LGBT group, you needed consult with someone who identifies with that identity in order to make sure that you don't fall into your own prejudice. I find it very powerful to recognize and to be humble about our own prejudice, to understand that we all have it ingrained in us and we all need to get rid of our own prejudice, even if we have all the right intentions. In the time we have left, I'd like to remind the audience that we are waiting for your inputs, questions, ideas, suggestions. We're very happy to hear from you. And while you're thinking about your inputs, I'd like to ask all four of you, but it might be more for Natalie and Suzanne. Your companies are for-profits. We see from audiences that they care about this. So it's not only about your good intentions, and I hear in your enthusiasm that you really care about this topic. Suzanne was telling you, or both of you were telling us that it's in your entire hierarchy. But how come it's not happening simply by market forces? If the audience wants to watch more diverse content, if this is selling, why is it not happening by itself? Is it because the people behind the camera are not diverse enough and they don't know how to sell to the people on the other side of the screen? It's some kind of a market failure that the industry doesn't understand the needs of people consuming content. Like I would expect it almost to regulate itself if it's as easy and simple as people want to watch more diverse content. What am I missing here?
Yeah, I can.
Sunny, you want to go first?
I can see Natalie and both. We both have I wonder if it's the same. Just maybe quickly, lots of reasons, but I think one really big reason is to break structures, and that's difficult, and it's problematic. People tend to always go back to their known networks, to their known directors, to their known production companies, because they know what they get, and so on and so on. And then it's really difficult to get new diverse talent. You have to invest, you have to be bold, you have to have the resources, and to have the reality check. It is difficult. It's not easy. So you have to have, and again, then when leadership comes back in, and this is why I'm so grateful for our leadership, you have to have a leadership who really encourages this and empowers you to make that structure break happen. I think that's a big, and it takes time. It just takes a lot of time.
Natalie, do you want to add to that?
Yes, please. No, I think first of all, of course, it's about gatekeeping, and we've, at least in Germany, public broadcasters, private broadcasters, when you look at them, they are people who decide who to commission to the programs. They're probably white, cis male, I would say. And now things are changing, but still like decision-making is made by white people predominantly in Germany. When I think about it, I'm sorry, I have to say also with the streamers, I think there's only one person I know in an executive position who is POC, who's working for a streamer in Germany, but there's no other POC person working at a public broadcaster, at a private broadcaster, or other streamer in Germany, which is a problem, I have to say, because it's still very Eurocentric. And of course, I would maybe just like buy more programs, out of my comfort zone. I think this is completely human, but you need the mix. I'm not saying everybody has to be black or female or whatever, but we need the mix. And I think we can only be better then. And for me as a producer, I think when 2015 Netflix came into our market, this was a great change for us, because the demand for different programs, for different casting, for different narratives was big. And we weren't used to that. So I'm so happy to have Suzanne now in our market as well. And we have the chance to tell different stories, to bring in new talent, to make new voices heard. As an addition, I think a lot of people are very afraid to lose their power, because they say, oh my God, where's my seat at the table now when, things change. But I think it's an addition, and we've heard, I think, a lot of stories over and over again. And now it's time for new voices. And it's a question of money as well, and we have to say, absolutely, sorry.
And speaking of new talents, there's a very explosive topic which has been on the news recently, which is cultural appropriation. Whether it's legitimate, it's not enough to have a fictitious role which represents a minority. And you were telling us how in the research of writing the script, you would reach out to that minority, you would talk to people who identify with that minority, but whether the actor or actress themselves need to be of that minority. So this happened several times. I'm aware of more American examples. Transparent, the actor was a cisgender male. This ended badly for other reasons as well. And now recently with Golda, I mean, Sarah Silverman made a point about the fact that the actress was not a Jewish actress, which surprised me as a Jewish man that the Jews might feel underrepresented in Hollywood. I thought that box was ticked, but apparently not. I mean, and Sarah Silverman is an American actress, which I'm not. So, I mean, I take her voice if she feels that there's a problem there. But where do you stand? And I invite all four of you to say, I mean, I take advantage also of the fact that both MEP and Sia and the coordinator, Moa, you are of ethnic minority and descent. So, I mean, it's not only your hats as policymakers, it's also your personal experience. Would you care for the actor or actress being part of the same community, or do you think we're pushing it too far and it's going to make it impossible for people in the industry to produce more inclusive content? Anybody who wants to jump at that? I know it's a difficult one.
It is a difficult one, but I think this is kind of the evolution, right? We've gone from blackface to now we're at the place where we feel like it needs to be authentic. People who have had that experience in cases where it's possible to act that role. And we have to remember that, you know, this is how change takes place. You know, it's just because people who have not historically maybe used their voice to state, you know, wrongs, you know, are now stating that no, if it's a trans character, it should be played indeed by someone, a trans actor, because this also, you know, I mean, I hear this all the time, you know, oh, we would love to have a keynote speaker of color, but they're just not out there, which is not true. If we don't do what Suzanne just said, where we just go to our typical networks, but we actually make an effort, we reach out, we actually get to know people outside of just the people we know. It just takes some effort, and it needs to be, you know, a commitment made. But I personally like the direction we're going, because you know, I mean, this is, in my opinion, the evolution that we
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. So is that a yes or a no in the end? If the progress is good, the direction is good, do we need
the direction is good. The direction is good.
Would you still insist? Would you find it offensive to have a cisgender person acting as transgender, or a non-Jewish woman acting as Golda?
I mean, then what would have to take place is what Natalie said, that who is in the creative process then, right? To ensure that at least the role is played authentically. Right. And I really like something that one of in the intro video that you had, there are so many intersections to my being. I mean, it was just, I mean, something, the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, but I've never heard it put in those words, because yes, to the outside world, you see me as a Black woman, but what else am I? What other, you know, intersections are there to my being? Really, is how do we get that authentically on screen?
Easy for producers, I suppose.
I know, I have a lot of expectations.
Which is good. Let's keep the expectations high. I don't want to live in a society that lowers its expectations. Member Insia?
Yeah, I also, I mean, totally agree that the direction that we're going towards is important, and why I believe that it's important that especially people belonging to groups that are not being represented in media or behind the scenes, a part of producing or being directors and so on and so forth. I think it's important in the sense of that it's not only one case, it's constantly happening. And the arguments that just was mentioned, I think many of us are fed up with that. The argument as well, we try to find women who are experts on this area, or people of colors who are experts of these areas, and so on and so forth. That argument is a bit passé. And we know that that there are women who are experts. There are actresses or people who could actually do the jobs on screen as well as off screen, as well as good as those who are not belonging to the different groups are doing it. So the main problem here, I think, it's not that it's happening once or twice; it's constantly happening, and is a part of ensuring that different groups are not being represented because the argument of we didn't find the right person from that specific group to this specific role, therefore we took somebody else. So that's the biggest problems, I would say, and that's also why I think it's important to ensure that the people playing a certain role and being LGBTI or a person of color or a woman actually also belong to that group. Or not at least, for example, trans and intersex people are not at all represented, not even many cases in the roles where the actor or actress plays a trans person or intersex persons. And we know that there are very good and very capable trans and intersex actor and actresses. And in the end, also, if you don't get a chance to be good at your job, how are you going to become good at it? I mean, white middle-aged men are not born to be directors or to be good actors. They have had chance after chance, and so must a person of color, a woman, trans person, intersex person, LGBTI person also have the same chances.
So to be devil's advocate, when it comes to women on panels, I think that's an easy one that we all agree on. There are even databases for those who try to use that excuse. Here are excellent speakers, so enough of that nonsense. But when it comes to entertainment, don't you think that there's a risk that the more we try to bring more minority to the screen and the more the minority is specific, it's going to become even more difficult to bring someone from that minority to also be the right typecast actor or actress? And then we're kind of in this vicious cycle that we're trying to bring those very specific minorities, but then it's just difficult to find someone to act those. So it might be that what you're describing in panels in Brussels is easier to solve than fiction productions, and maybe Suzanne and Natalie can answer that better, to find those good actors. Or would you say, Natalie, that in your case it wasn't? I mean, you told us about a series on LGBT people. I guess also that's not such a small minority. Maybe that's an easiest one to handle. I don't know. But if you needed to do something which is much more specific, would it be possible if you wanted to do about, I don't know, a lesbian woman from a Turkish migrant background to Germany who's, I don't know, also handling with this and that, and suddenly you would say, okay, there's no way I can find that person. At some point, acting is acting, and the profession is to become someone else, not to be myself. I mean, where do we
you're absolutely right. We have a big conversation about this at the moment in Germany. I think Susanne will know that. I think we're like in a transition phase. We're evolving, the evolution is going on, hopefully. But I think, maybe also here in 5 or 10 years time, we don't have to discuss this anymore. But in the past years, people were overlooked. They weren't given a chance. So I think we have to look for the right people, to give the people a chance. If we don't find anybody, then we can still talk about, okay, can we still do the project? But it was so easy for years to say, oh, we don't have Black actors, we don't have Turkish actors, whatever, we have to fly them in from the States or something like that. And, it was always an easy excuse. So I think we're like in this transition phase now where we have to really work and also, develop more, creative people, to give them a chance to evolve and to be seen. And, what I think is so tragic at the moment, that now there's such a big demand for this kind of talent, but it's not there. Because of course, now we won't find female, lesbian, Turkish directors, 10 people I can call for a show, because they didn't know there was a job for them. And now you ask them, oh, they should have a track record. How could they have a track record? Because, they didn't work so for a long time. So I think we really have to put money in it now, and maybe have also we try to do tandems, that we have people working together, one more experienced, one less experienced, but, to bring the people into working and to get more quickly into a professional work.
So we're nearing the end. I see your hand, Suzanne. I'll turn to you in a second. But as we're nearing the end, and great questions are coming in through the chat. They came a bit late, so now I'm trying to aggregate some of them. And I see some kind of a common thread among quite a few of them. Many are anonymous, but I see Greg Jones who did identify themselves, and many of the questions are asking about advocacy. So Greg Jones is saying, what are the attitudes of sponsors and advertisers, reflecting on diversity, but there's another anonymous question about how to encourage gatekeepers to share their power. So many of them are asking about advocacy. How do you convince the people around you? So we, I mean, the four speakers here, the four panelists, and I would assume that most people watching us care about this topic, see it as important, but I'd like to conclude by asking each of you, and I'll start with you, Suzanne, because you wanted to react. And with that, we'll conclude on your role. I mean, you were saying before, Natalie, you're not an activist, you're a producer, but in the end, you do find yourself in this discussion, I suppose, of trying to make a case and explaining why this matters so much. How do we reach the hearts and minds of the gatekeepers, of the sponsors, of citizens, of governments that are not always on the same page? How do we, what is the most compelling case and story that you make for the people around you? And this will be our last round of comments. And Suzanne, let's start with you.
So it's actually to the same point Natalie just mentioned, I think. So first thing is we need to work on succession management, as we call it in business language. And this is, I think, a really good opportunity for us, maybe even to work together, because entertainment media industry and EU Commission, for example, we could work on whether it's, recognition prizes, whether it's support through mentoring, partnering programs, scholarships, etc. So I think that's something really important to work on in order to have the succession management in place. And then to your question, very briefly, I think it's the same as we just discussed. We have to break through certain patterns and structures, and we have to, invest the time, invest the money, have hard decisions sometimes, decide some advertising companies cannot work with us anymore if they don't agree, because it's partnering is so important. We have to find partners with equal visions and equal ideas on D&E&I. And that's, by the way, exactly what we have a program for that at Viacom, because that's so important. Okay. But it's work, and it takes time.
Michaela, do you find yourself in difficult conversations around you on making the case?
Well, yes. I think, I mean, it's almost like a pedagogical exercise, right? To try to kind of convince people or to explain why this is not just an issue relating to people who are historically have been, not represented, but it's actually all of our common issue, because the more truthfully, people are represented, as I mentioned earlier, it is really shaping the world. And then and with gatekeepers, it's in all aspects of society, we see gatekeepers. And here, I mean, either when they retire, right? Or, we have to, I mean, it's really about leadership committing also to this. I really liked what Suzanne said on how you really are trusting the employees to kind of, because this is what you have the support of leadership, and then the staff, and this is how you create that shift the culture of any organization, right? To really, and this is the cultural shift that we need, I think.
Wonderful. I think your kids just arrived home, so we'll let you go in a moment. Member of Parliament Incio, your final remarks. You were insinuating that you find yourself in minority sometimes, both in the sense that we know there's a problem of diversity within the institution, and also when it comes to your mandate as a legislator. But how do you go about convincing, you can take it any direction you want, your peer MEPs, constituents, governments? What do you find effective? Remember, Incio?
I think one of the, do you hear me? Yes?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Perfect. No, I think one of the most important thing is, of course, awareness, and discussions. One thing that hit me very deeply was during the BLM demonstrations and manifestations. I had some discussions with some conservative colleagues. And they were claiming before the big manifestations and demonstrations taking place, they were claiming that, well, there is no institutionalized racism within the police force, for example. A month or 2 months later, I don't remember the exact time, we had this resolution on anti-racism presented in the parliament, which I was a part of negotiating. Anti-racism, and then a few of those people who were saying that, well, these claims are ridiculous, actually voted in favor of the same resolution that included the things that they claimed didn't happen in the society. And what hit me there was how important it is through awareness and organization to unite. And to voice up, and through that also you will be able to convince legislators who you might in the beginning think that, well, they are a lost case. Sorry, yeah. So that would be my actually last remarks on how we ensure to also make change on screen. Because in the end, both of it goes hand in hand. And I think it's very much important that the representation takes place, but also, as you mentioned, that we are not reproducing stereotypes and locking on in women as victims, for example, or people of color as criminals, but rather that, that all of us, regardless of gender belonging, ethnicity, and so on, comes of different colors and different roles on screen and off screen.
Okay, Natalie, we'll finish with you, but we are running a bit over time. So I hate to break it to you, but I think you're an activist in the closet. You don't see yourself as an activist, but I do. So I don't know if there are any arguments that came up in this conversation now that you find that you're going to use in your next conversations, or something that you find powerful. It seems to me like you're a little bit in the Berlin bubble, where, not correct me, where diversity is doesn't strike people as such a huge shock, but maybe I'm naive and I'm painting it in rosy colors. But yeah, I mean, what do you find effective when you do come across those gatekeepers, those people coming from the hegemonic majority who just don't get it? Is there anything that makes them tick and say, okay, now I get it. It is a problem, and it does concern me as well?
I believe in data, and I think what I take with me is this great survey. Thank you, ViacomCBS, for this great survey. I will send it to everybody I know. No, because I think, data is very convincing. It's not about feelings or something, being reduced to something. It's just black and white. It's data. So I love that. And I think, although if, you would love people to change their minds, at the end of the day, I think it's all about money. And since the demand, let's be honest, in our business, since the demand for different storytelling, diverse storytelling, different programs is so big at the moment in Germany, I think people have to change their minds, because it's not only the German market now. If I'm producing, I might be producing for the world, which is great. And so no, it's not like everybody can be blonde and blue-eyed and male and cis and whatever. So, you have to change things. And I'm really looking forward to this new world, also for our children. I saw Michaela's child already. She's going to be happy to have, different role models on television.
Absolutely, for mine as well. With that, I guess we have to conclude because we are running a bit over time. But thank you for allowing us to have a conversation about a disturbing reality in a very optimistic and positive tone. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm and optimism here about the progress that we're making, even if it's not fast enough and it needs to be pushed forward. So let me once again thank the panelists, MEP Ncia, Michaela, Suzanne, and Natalie. Let me thank the organizers, ViacomCBS and EU40, for organizing this event, bringing me on board, and specifically the production team, Bruce, Jennifer, Alessandro, Mona. We've been working together over the past weeks tirelessly to make this event happen. Of course, to you who've been watching us, there was a very high retention rate, I have to say. The numbers were almost the same until the end. So the panelists were doing a good job in keeping the attention. Thank you for registering and for watching and contributing with some ideas. I think there were some really concrete, tangible results here of some new ideas, new collaborations, new identities that need to be represented. So I learned a lot. I hope that you did as well. With that note, thank you all of you. Stay warm and healthy. Have a wonderful day and stay tuned for more coming from ViacomCBS and EU40. Goodbye.